I think we'll probably go ahead and get started as well. Um, I want to thank everybody for um, kicking off your meeting season again. Some of you, this is your second meeting of the day, and thanks for coming after the accelerator meeting. Um, you must really enjoy. Yes, right. Enjoy the meeting scene and the meeting circuit. So I'm Danny Kincaid. I am one of the co-chairs, the current co-chairs. Steve Diggs is en route. Steve was hoping to co-convene this assembly meeting with me. I am floating in between the ESIP board meeting and the CDF meeting due to the timing that was chosen for the assembly. And we want to thank ESIP again for allowing the CDF to kind of um, co-convene our assembly meeting along with the ESIP winter meeting. We've been getting some great benefits from ESIP, and we thank them for that. Um, we do have a couple of our, well, at least one other executive committee member here, and so I'll introduce Chuck as well. If you can just raise your hand. Chuck Meertens is here from UNAPCO. He is a at-large committee member. Um, sure. Yeah. And so we're 2 hours today, and we have a pretty packed agenda. We just added um, another agenda topic on, and so we'll try and get the ball rolling here. Um, we have a lot of primarily updates to inform you of what's been going on lately, and then some new business before we adjourn, and we'll get started now with Kirsten Leonard, who will provide us with some updates on the shared infrastructure workshop that went off in July of 2019. Um, that resulted in a white paper we gave sent recently to Eva Zanzurkia. I believe the link here will go to that, and we encourage everybody to share that as well with your program managers. And Kirsten, you don't have any slides, or do you have slides? Okay, great. Yeah, whichever you can. You need the, you can use the remote one if you want. Okay.
Um, yeah, as Danny said already, we had um, a workshop on the shared infrastructure in July this summer, and the outcome was a white paper that we have provided to NSF. We have also encouraged, and that is based on the recommendation from Eva, to share that report with the program managers of the individual facilities. I think the most important part of that white paper is the roadmap that was developed at the workshop, how over 5 years um, we could bring facilities to use a shared infrastructure. The infrastructure was defined through workshops, through that workshop, but also to previous surveys. And that infrastructure really involves primarily storage and computing, with the vision that the data would reside close to the computing, and would thus sort of move towards a more um, consistent access that would allow better integration and faster use of the data. So I think the important issue now is to see where we're going from here. We do need feedback from NSF, obviously. So again, I encouraged everybody who is running a facility that has NSF funding to make sure that that white paper is on everybody's horizon, that you send it to program managers. And I would suggest, I mean, we have this packed agenda, but I really would like to take the opportunity that we are all here in person. Uh, for those who are interested in moving forward with that shared infrastructure pilot, to get together, after 6 o'clock, meet up at the bar around the table and talk about next steps that we can do. We had discussed during the workshop and previously funding opportunities that we might be able to pursue, what type of funding we want to pursue. Eva had suggested a research coordination network, which I am personally, I think it's just not going to get us anywhere to continue talking rather than developing actually a first pilot. So, is anybody able and interested to join a meeting after the CDF here? Great. Okay, I'll make sure we have a table up there, and then we can get together and talk a bit further. I think that's all I really could say. Danny?
Kirsten, has Eva indicated that she's read that? Have you heard any feedback from her individually, just personally?
Nothing, no. I mean, I asked her if she would attend today, and she said that because of travel restrictions from NSF, she wouldn't be able to come. But she had kind of indicated she might join remotely, but I'm not sure she's on.
Just to follow up on that question, can we get a timetable for a response from NSF, from Eva? Can we ask her when she will be able to?
She was also going to promote it within, right? At least within size, she was going to share it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, she said that it would be shared with Amy Wharton and others.
Can I just, how many people here were at the workshop in July? So have you guys shared it with program managers at all? Have you gotten to, yeah? Yeah. But no feedback.
I mean, I have already in my last year's proposal for the continuation of OCHEM, I have referred to that and said that I need that, so hopefully the message is getting through.
For those who have read it, does anybody have any comments toward it? I mean, was there a general consensus that that was in the best interest and represented the workshop output? Or needs any refinement? I think that's a.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
identify next steps. Yes.
my hope would be that we can get a small group of interested people together. There's obviously no more funding now that I've spent out my my alliance grant for that, but maybe everybody is able to get to Denver or something and spend a day translating the roadmap into the outline of a proposal and then go from there.
I think it's really going to be key to have a champion to coordinate it. Even within, within the group that was at the workshop, having some sort of rallying piece.
And that's something we can identify tonight.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any more comments or questions on the shared infrastructure?
Hi, this is Arlene Anderson with USDOE. I joined a couple minutes late.
Hi, Darlene. Sure.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say I did read the paper, the white paper report, and in terms of the shared infrastructure, as far as the USDOE geothermal data repository, we probably would not participate in the shared infrastructure because it's a repository that has all of our funds recipients' data. But I think it's a great idea, for some of the other category of users to try and do so.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the
Sure.
comment.
Yep.
Um, all right, so okay, it looks like we have the info to meet Kirsten later on this topic. The next agenda topic is Kirsten and Shelley on the Coptis update from this past December's AGU meeting, which I hear was wildly successful and well attended.
Yeah. So I think everybody, I guess everybody is familiar with Coptis. Anybody not familiar with Coptis? No. Okay. Um, Coptis is, I think, at a critical stage now. We've had or Shelley completed the Enabling Fair Data project, which really led to implementation of more rigorous data policies at the publishers. And we're now about half year, 9 months into gaining experiences with this implementation. And it became clear at the meeting that we held in December in San Francisco that there are a number of challenges. And I think that's why the meeting was really well attended. We bursted out of the seams. That was close to 50 people. Thank goodness the breakfast, thank you to AGU, was enough, but it was a mix of representatives from data facilities and very international, which was good. We had people from Germany, Great Britain, Japan, Australia. I'm not sure I forget something. But also we had, for example, a representative from GBIF, from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. We had somebody from DOE, so it was fairly broad and reaching into different disciplines. We had a number of publishers there, and we had representatives of other organizations that deal with data infrastructure in some ways. So it was a great discussion, with bringing up a lot of concerns. I think the biggest issue that keeps coming up is the lack of proper data citation still, that we need to figure out a way how the actual proper citation of DOIs in references is being implemented. There was a lot of discussion about the role of reviewers versus the role of repositories versus the role of publishers. Clearly the pushback again from publishers saying we can't burden reviewers with even more tasks. It's not up to them to check that data are properly cited. So that's a big issue. And as far as I know, there are some discussions going on with actually a funded effort to engage publishers more on figuring out how the actual inclusion of data references in the paper can be structured and how that can be supported, hopefully. I mean, from my own experience over that last half year, I mean, at the EarthChem repository, data contributions have quadrupled. And it is impossible for us to keep up with the number of data sets that are submitted, some of them in poor quality, some of them with a demand of getting the DOI ASAP within an hour because things like that. So there is a lot about workflows. We need to figure out how we can work between repositories and publishers to create workflows that are integrated into that integrate the curation procedures with the publishing workflow. So that's a big challenge, I think, where we need to think how can the CDF be helpful here, or can contribute. Again, as I just heard Ruth in the other room saying, it has to be international. So this is the the same for the publishing world. It can't be something that we just do here in the US in the CDF. So that's clearly a challenge. So we need to look, I think, for some funding, be it an RCN or something that actually works on getting repositories together to define their requirements, their workflows, and publishers um, to see what can be changed in the manuscript processing softwares and current implemented procedures to make sure data are properly integrated into it. Discussions came up about the release of data that, some of the publishers actually demand that data be restricted until the manuscript is published. Some of the repositories don't have that capability and so on. So there's a lot to, when we get down in the weeds, in the nitty gritty of, of actually helping people. And I think there was a really interesting comment also by Deb Agarwal from the ESSD. It's Ameriflux, but the facility is now called Earth Surface something science data. And was the concern that we have promised over time our researchers, our users, all the benefits of publishing data, of getting credit for it, of getting citations and so on, and it's not happening, and we're losing the first adopters. And this is a big concern. I think that we've said, you're going to be cited for your data and so on, and now it's not happening, and people aren't coming back to it. So there's a sense of urgency, I think, that we need to be aware of. With that, I mean, I would be very happy to get more ideas of how we can move forward. We're definitely setting up another Coptis meeting at the EGU in Vienna, probably both a town hall and a splinter meeting. Helen Glaves is helping with that, and potentially a meeting at the JPGU in Japan if you're going to be there. But that still, those are always, an hour-long meetings, and that's not enough to really change the current infrastructure and ecosystem of data and publications. On that funny note.
Anybody have any questions regarding the Coptis meeting? I actually have a question. Is there output of that sort of gathering that we could kind of, I thought there were maybe notes taken, or
there is a long Google Doc with notes that Shelley and Sarah Ramdeen put together. I mean, I went through it a couple of times now. It needs some cleanup, obviously, but we can do that. I mean, just
something shareable. And were there action items that you could report out on? That there were? Okay.
We actually, I mean, time was just short between AGU and this meeting. We had talked about inviting some publishers to the CDF meeting to have more discussion. I think it would be good to do that for the summer meeting.
Would there be benefit in doing that, inviting publishers on a normal CDF monthly call? Is that something, or you feel that it needs to have a critical mass in the room?
Yeah.
Publishers do. Yeah, it would be great to have them share that with maybe the assembly. And
I mean, the other idea would be to, extend, maybe have an extended meeting at the summer CDF that we announce in time for publishers to be there and use like a half day to dive deeper into issues. I saw that Ted wanted. No, I thought you had your hand up. Oh, just stretching. Okay.
So I think that would be, I mean, personally for my repository, I think that would be valuable. Does anybody else have comments or suggestions on having a more focused meeting with some publishers in the room?
Yep.
Okay.
Then
Shelley, do you
I get on that.
There are a variety of other conversations that are happening between, especially on the publisher side, that it would be great to figure out how to make these connections. One of them is happening, AGU wasn't part of it, but Wiley was, Nature, Fair Sharing, RE3 Data, DataCite, having to do with a white paper that's out there, which I'll put in this link. It's currently out for review. The publishers have come together on their recommendations for what they'll allow as a repository list. So think about the Nature's down select list that we're all, like Bicodima got on a couple of years ago, and I think, no, maybe, okay.
No, we're still trying.
So they put together this list that needs feedback, and it'd be really a good idea if CDF provided feedback to it. It had very much a publisher view on it, and it would be great to get repositories to come back. There's another conversation happening, also engaged with Nature. They want to talk about their criteria in an open forum, like a workshop as to what, like an online webinar workshop, in order to talk with repositories participating for a conversation on how to get on their list. And they, because of enabling fair data, they want as many geoscience repositories as possible. And they're frustrated. This came up at our last CDF meeting, I think. They're frustrated that they're not getting more feedback. And I said, well, why don't we have a webinar? So there's something we could do with CDF maybe in later this month or February that could get that conversation going and also include the topics having to do with data citation. So those are just two.
No, I just wanted to add to that also that from my recent experiences in getting this flood of data into EarthChem, quite a number of data was actually not quite really fitting to our facility. And it was, it was one journal. The editor had decided we were the place to send everything. And so it kept coming. And it triggered for me, I contacted other repositories and said, I think this is a data set that you might want. And I mean, it was even including the GFZ in Potsdam, so it wasn't just US. And that interaction, they said, oh, we have some geochemical data that we can send you. I think this is sort of a dialogue that, or hub, I don't know what you want to call it, that the CDF can also bring to the table and say, why don't we actually among ourselves make sure that when we get data that or questions about, can I send you my data, say, no, you should go to this other place that is more appropriate. That's just a very simple, a contribution in many ways, but we have a community here at the table. Why not start doing that and supporting, these directories of repositories that seem to lag behind and not quite getting the right adoption, we can do something there as well.
This is Matt Marinick. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
So just picking up on that comment from Kirsten, one thought, and I know this is outside of what you discussed in the shared infrastructure report, but maybe there's a shared services component of what the CDF looks at as well that encompasses what you just described, Kirsten, where maybe there's essentially a data repository liaison service where instead of every repository having to know what every other repository does, there's some kind of service that you could contact and say, I've got this submission and I don't know that it fits us. Can you find a place for it to go? And I don't know exactly how that liaison service would come to be or where it would sit, but within NCAR, we're doing something basically very similar to that internally. We have a number of repository services, and we set up a kind of a one-stop place where people contact us, and then we point them to the right repository. And I'm wondering if some kind of model like that would be more useful than a huge list of repositories that really no one can fully parse. But if there's some group of people who specialize just in this, they could help point data to the right place instead of everyone having to try to parse that list on their own.
So Matt, you're not talking about a tool. You're talking about like people or.
Yeah, and maybe there's a tooling portion to it, but I think people are more effective in this kind of thing.
Like a help desk kind of thing for
Yeah.
And I
correct data repository.
just wanted to add in that I learned from Brooks Henson, actually, that there was another editor at the Coptis meeting from the Astronomy Society, AAS. In their journal, they actually do have that person. So it's a person paid by the publisher to take care of data and make sure it goes to the right place. So it's something to just keep in mind as another business model in some way, that if the publishers support actually that type of help to find the right repository.
My comment is not central to Coptis, but related to Coptis's goals. As many of you know, this year there has been even more pressure on publishers to provide open access. And many state systems are taking very strong positions on that. And I was wondering if that discussion came up during the Coptis meeting in terms of what the publishers are willing to do, not just take data from authors, but in terms of providing greater access. On the one hand, we are asking people to publish their data and give it to the publishers, and are the publishers willing to open their journals up more for academic use?
Bob, did you have?
Yeah, so I think all these ideas are great, first of all, but I think that we need to make sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. I thought RE3 data was supposed to be working with the publishers to make sure that each of the publishers isn't trying to rely on their own list, but would just go to a common list of all the different data repositories that are out there, and some would be even tagged in terms of how they might be qualified as well as by their domain. So and all these other ideas are great as well, but it would be nice to see that which already has a lot of momentum to continue through what I thought they were supposed to do, but maybe I was misunderstanding it.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. Was there another question in the back before we? Nick, do you have something?
I was just going to say, RE3 data has a lot of data repositories of various quality. And so Nature and, other publishers are going to have probably shorter lists and more requirements. So I'm not sure, it would be great to have just one list, but if that's the case, each publisher is going to have sort of their own, unless everybody is at the highest level, then there's going to be multiple lists that are going to be accepted for different journals.
Right. And so I also feel like there's a component of funder engagement here too as well, because for us, it's not a question of the journal as much as where your funder wants you to put your data. And as long as that's pointed to, there's this chicken and egg between how do we get on the journal's list, because the funders are telling us we have to put our data here, and then the journals are saying no, but that journal's not on our list. And so I feel like there's this dog chasing its tail kind of problem, and to just say, well, we'll create this tool or we'll create the service, seems like there'll still be this underlying problem of orthogonal intent by the funder versus the journal. And so I feel like that's a cultural shift to have everybody in the room and kind of hash out. If NSF says your data shall go in one of these designated repositories, but those repositories aren't on the journal list, then what, how do we not put the researcher in the middle?
Does NSF have that sort of list, or?
It does for some programs and divisions, not all of them. Obviously,
Okay.
some investigators are sort of left out in the wind, but some are very explicit. Anyway, so I think all these are great discussion topics, and I feel like it would be great to disseminate some of the discussion from that ad hoc meeting to the CDF. So.
There is a COPTES session at the ESIP meeting, a dedicated session. It's tomorrow afternoon, I think at 4 o'clock, but I
Great.
can look it up again. But
Great,
you know,
thank you
we
for
can
that.
continue some of the discussions, obviously, or most of the discussions there.
Great, I think this is great. Obviously, there's a lot of content here to get through, more than we allowed it on the agenda here now. So I thank you for the updates, and we'll look forward to seeing the notes and some of those action items, Shelley. That would be great. Thanks. So next on the agenda is an update on the Open Knowledge Network and the Accelerated Convergence workshop that just happened, fresh off the presses, is Melissa Cragen, who was one of the co-conveners of that workshop. Thanks for giving us an update. Oh, that's a great question.
That should fit, maybe not. Let's see if it fits.
I think the trick is if we do that, it will not
This one. I need this one.
will not be part of yeah, I think we will. Oh, that would be great, because I think we can have Dan make you a.
The answer is I'm too idiotic to do that. I mean, I can't do it on the laptop.
Could I just?
Good idea. Good idea, Shelley. Good idea, Shelley. I have no idea how to do that. Okay.
I'm hoping. Do we still have everybody online? Or did we lose?
I'm here. This is Arlene.
Yep, I'm here.
This is Steve Diggs. You still have me?
I'm here.
That doesn't work. We can always log you in and. I know. So, right. So with respect to the, the previous topic regarding RE3, I wonder, Shelley, if you could comment on or maybe Kirsten, if RE3 is still being leveraged as a resource.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, right. So DataCite owns RE3 data, and through the Enabling Fair Data project, we had some funds, 3 months, did what we could with the metadata that already existed. The metadata didn't fully align to the amazing document that Ruth Dorr helped us put together, which had the full decision tree for how to figure out as an author where to put your data in a repository. It's a complex tree. So we are still at the point where that complexity is not resolved in a tool that makes sense and is easy to use by an author. So you come to an AGU journal, the very first question that I get from authors, and my editors are really pissed off at this point, is where do I put my data? It is very hard to use the repository finder tool in order to figure that out. So how do we get from Ruth's amazing decision tree, which we all know is amazing, to a usable tool that is going to actually be used by a real author who doesn't think like we do and use vocabulary to repository informatics vocabulary. They just don't think that way. They're an author. So there was some funds that came from the European Commission recently that were supposed to go into RE3 data, the repository finder tool, to expand it improve the metadata, expand it beyond the geosciences. And I don't have a current status on that, but I'll poke them right now and see if I can get some answers. But it still won't be a panacea. So it doesn't get past that user interface thinking of the complexity of your institution, your country, your data, your journal, et cetera. And the problem, and I'm just going to vamp until they get this. I'm keep going until they're done, and then I'll stop. So the point that Danny brought up about, so Danny's point that I'm mentioning is the funders aren't in alignment with the journals, who aren't in alignment with the repositories on where do we send our authors, right? Okay, so absolutely, probably one of the most important points to make. To add on to that complexity, if you read, I put the link into the paper that's open right now through the end of the month, and I really wanted to just inundate these folks with a lot of comments because they really didn't include the repository community in a robust way in building this out, which is unfortunate because now they're going to hopefully get our voices coming back at them. But if you read it, it highlights the fact that the list that Nature uses is specific for scientific data, which is a very narrow, myopic way of looking at, they require data, the journal is about data. Is about data, and Nature has adopted that list in general, Springer Nature, which doesn't make any sense because it's not domain
It went to the wrong,
way. Domain repositories are built.
Sorry, it went the wrong way. So let's just do that. Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure why it's mirrored that way.
Yeah, so we need to switch it.
Oh, okay. I'll let you do that.
Well,
Sorry, everybody online. We're almost there.
It's visible online.
It's invisible. We're getting there.
No,
sorry.
It looks fine.
It looks fine. Great. Okay.
Yes, I see slides.
Fantastic.
Slides
and you
good.
still see slides.
And now
Yeah,
I see a
fine.
presentation.
Okay.
Do you see the presentation view? The presenter view?
No,
or
I
do
see
you...
the actual presentation.
Okay.
I see a title slide and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Good enough. I'm going for it. That's it. I'm going for it. So you all will get to see my notes and I won't. That's okay. Hi, good afternoon. Sorry to keep you waiting. Just technical problems on my end. Okay, so a little while ago, the ECHO office was, the EarthCube office was asked to put together a workshop to bring together Open Knowledge Network awardees, so projects existing, recently funded through the Convergence Accelerator program, and some EarthCube projects in the informatics space. Many were invited, and of course, it's day after holidays, first day of classes, what have you. So we had about 40 people in the room, maybe a little bit more than that. So I'm gonna fudge a little bit here because I can't actually see the slides. So let's, I can almost, there we go. All right, so the goals of this meeting were to bring the communities together and, okay, I'm trying to move the GoToMeeting buttons, but that's all right. So the goal was to bring these two groups together. So obviously, EarthCube projects are funded through the Geo Directorate and the EarthCube program. The Open Knowledge Network projects are funded through the Convergence Accelerator, which is in the IIA Directorate or division. Thanks, Danny. So the goal was to bring these groups together and think about opportunities to connect. That's okay. It's fine. I can see it fine. Thank you. The goal was to connect them, to be thinking about ways to build knowledge infrastructure, ontologies, vocabularies, tools, platforms to link and add value to data, but also ways to bring different kinds of data sets and resources together to be able to run new tools for both inferencing and also just discovering new knowledge. So that could be driving driving new questions and what have you, but also to begin to bring people together that could ask questions in the earth science space or in the geospace, the kinds of questions that focus on whether it's mechanisms or structure, function, and perturbation, to be able to ask questions of data sets and interlinked data sets where our knowledge or understanding changes over time, right? So those are the kinds of scientific driving questions that were part of the discussions today for this. And also to be able to not only bring people together and talk about places where people in the open knowledge space and people in the geo community space or the EarthCube space could potentially work together, but ways to provide some feedback to NSF, both for the upcoming solicitation in the Convergence Accelerator program, and also to provide some feedback to the EarthCube program on ways to potentially think about some open knowledge projects in the EarthCube space. We wanted to identify some common thematic areas and also facilitate potential working groups to move some of this forward. And we are hoping that there might be a couple of new proposals that come about for the Convergence Accelerator program. So just briefly on the Accelerator program, yeah, and you all are only seeing half a slide. And thanks to Chait and Baru for this slide here, but the Convergence Accelerator program is intended, it's a new organizational structure. It is a pilot at NSF to accelerate the transition of convergence research into practice in areas of national importance, grand challenges, and the big ideas driven by some of the big ideas at NSF, including harnessing the data revolution and some others that will be coming out for the next solicitation. One big focus is that the Convergence Accelerator is about use-inspired research. The outcomes that they're looking for are not necessarily papers. In fact, they're not getting publications as the best outcomes of some of these, but in fact, test beds, tools, living labs. They're looking for ways to go above, national and above kinds of scale. And the other pieces here that they're looking for clear deliverables. So it's not a traditional research project, but in fact, the proposals are up to $5 million for 2 years with a set of deliverables. So those are interesting things and important, and we wanted to, make sure that we're thinking about how to get the EarthCube community potentially involved in this new funding opportunity. Particularly because there are direct links to the informatics and kinds of funded projects already happening under the EarthCube program. So the agenda for today, we did some framing and context of the meeting. We did introductions of everyone. So it was a very interesting cross-section of people from many communities, everything from ocean science, fisheries, space science, director of science, and then the folks from open knowledge, which included people from philosophy and computer science and a whole range of other information science oriented disciplines. We had a historical perspective on knowledge representation, information science, perspective on a successful platform in the open knowledge space and open science space and Deep Carbon Observatory that Peter Fox gave, and a demonstration by one of his students of current network visualization and analysis tools, which was really interesting and showed the ways that the open knowledge network successful projects can actually lead to new kinds of knowledge and understanding of various disciplines. We had a set of lightning talks from both OKN and EC projects, and then we had a nice talk on what's happening at NIH in their data project, which is related to the OKN. Bunch of open, open discussions, and then we've got some feedback both for us in the ECHO office on how we might do this again, and also now feedback for NSF. I'm not going to read this slide. So these slides will make this available. What I put here was the set of position statements and the topics that we got from people coming to the meeting, and then the set of lightning talks. So you can see the range of topics we had there. This does not at all include all the multitude of people and disciplines we had in the room, but it's a really good cross section and gave us a good start. We ended with a set of questions to get feedback from the whole room, and now we're going to write this report. We have a really short turnaround time for NSF. The funding was combined funding from EarthCube and the Convergence Accelerator program, and so our project will be writing this report up really quickly and sending that on to Chaitan and his team within the next couple of weeks. Questions? Okay, thank you.
So I'm just assuming once you guys have that workshop report, that maybe that's something we can share and disseminate with the
Yes,
yeah, great.
happy to
with
do
the
that.
CDF. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's just check on our timing here. So we're starting to kind of run a little long with the technical difficulties, but next up on the agenda is going to be Doug and Adam on updates for the next steps in P419. You guys set, and do you need anything specific? Okay. Yeah, you want me to fire that up? Right.
Go for it. Sweet. All right. Come on up. More than that, man. Get up here, man. What's Robin without Batman, man? So hello, everyone. My name is Doug. This is Adam. And we're going to give you a quick update on the work that we've been doing with Project 418, Project 419, and where we're going to go from there. So we're going to be as quick as we can with this and just kind of run through some slides, and then if there's some questions, we can just kind of get into that part afterwards. So how did we get here? Just to give people just a quick historical background, right? This grew out of the CDF, and it was a project to work with several of the CDF members and to go through this whole process of, how do we describe, publish, index, and serve data around type data set, right? Leveraging the schema.org patterns of structured data on the web. We had opportunities to interact with some of the representatives at Google and the work that they were doing that then became Google Dataset Search. And so that was great, right? And so that was Project 418. We got some money to do some more work. And, really there's a lot that came out and a lot of lessons that came out of the work that we did in 419, and there's a link to the report that we did on that here. But, just to be super quick, there's really kind of two tracks that were involved, right? There was the tooling track that I primarily worked on, and the vocabulary track that Adam worked on. So I'll just touch on the tooling real quick. Really, if you want to know what we did, you can go to gleaner.io, right? There was really kind of three things that came out of that work. One was the Gleaner package itself, and we did a lot of work to containerize that and make it easy for people to just utilize a Docker environment to pull down the containers and run that. Now, what does that mean? The Gleaner code is what we're using to generate the index. It reads a set of sitemaps from the providers from a configuration file. And so the goal really was to make it easy for anyone to build the indexes. So that wasn't something just unique to us, right? And so with that tool, you can download just a simple configuration file for Docker. It installs the application, and then you can run through the configuration and generate indexes on your own. Right? It's still not super easy, right? It's still not just something you can do just at the click of a button. But we do have a video there, and we are kind of improving it and trying to make it as easy as we can for people to generate their own indexes, right? Tangram was some work that we did that kind of spun out of that work, which was the ability to do validation on these graphs. And so we're particularly interested in shackle shapes as ways to do validation. I think Adam will talk maybe a little bit more about that either on this slide or the next one. And then the other tool was Fence. And Fence was kind of a tool that allowed people to take a resource, put it into that. It's a web-based tool. And if there's time later and people want to see, I can pull it up real quick and show you what it looks like when you do an example of it. But there are links at gleaner.io that will show that to you. But the primary goal there was just to allow people a real quick idea of how do I validate my JSON LD documents? How do I see them at Google Dataset Search? How do I see them at JSON LD Playground? How do I see what they look like validated against some shape validations for the Google required and recommended? So those are the real products from a tooling standpoint that we generated out. Do you want to talk a little bit about the vocabulary?
Yep. Okay, so I just want to talk about three major components here of what has happened over the past year. So essentially, we've taken this URL, scienceonschema.org, and that just sort of redirects to a GitHub repository of guidance documents hosted by ESIP and the organization there on GitHub. The guidance documents have two documents, one for describing repositories and the services that they provide, and then another guidance document on how to describe data sets using schema.org. Now focusing on the data set, what we've done over the past year is sort of work on how we might pull in some domain-specific vocabularies, and that's mostly been on the data set parameter side. And so we've got a couple examples in the documentation there, but there's a lot more work that we can do there, and specifically by just going beyond the parameters. So that's a nice area to probably focus on in the future. And so yeah, so variables and sort of like collection methods help us address fairness across schema.org. And so we can talk about the measurement techniques, the methods used to collect that data set. And obviously we talked about the variables. We did some work also to improve the temporal coverage. So schema.org out of the box, the core, just lets you talk about date times, which isn't necessarily applicable across all science data sets, specifically ones that are dealing with time durations or time like time moving. And so I think Ethan Davis, who I don't see in here, over at gosh, help me out, Unidata, they have a data API where whenever you hit that, you're going to get the last 3 weeks of data. And so how do you describe that with just a start and end date from schema.org? That doesn't work. And so this work helped us do that through the W3C OWL time specification. And then also we did a little bit of work on describing these data services, so APIs and access to dynamic data. And there's a lot of work we can do to improve there, but we did what we could with what's at core schema.org. And I think the biggest and probably the best thing that happened this past year was just governance of these documents moved over to ESIP, and a schema.org cluster was spun up after the summer meeting, thanks to Ruth Dewar and her championing for that effort. And that's been fantastic. And so there's 2 telecons a month, and that's really to help facilitate global time coverage so that folks in Australia aren't left out. So please get involved there. A lot of interesting work is happening there in terms of working on these guidance documents, making sure that they're clear, understanding the audiences and the variance in that audience. So certainly there's technical people that are going to be looking at that, but also there's folks that are just sort of like data managers or data curators, and you have to use like a different language to talk to them. And that was a suggestion by Ruth as well, which was fantastic. Let's see, Ruth also ran a schema.org workshop at the Polar Data Forum in Helsinki, is that right? And got a lot of the folks from those repositories onboarded there and engaged in working on the GitHub repository, submitting issues for the guidance documentation. And I think Lewis McGibney, who I'm not sure is here either, ran a workshop at AGU to do something similar. And so it's been great to see just sort of the community converge at the cluster and sort of work on making sure that these documentation and guidance don't age, or that they age well and that they don't become obsolete. And so there's a business meeting for that cluster tomorrow at 4 p.m. And so we hope you come and join us. We'll be talking about governance and how we manage that resource moving forward.
All right, so last slide here. So where do we start? Where were we? Where to next? So we were, I guess, I thought we got some guidance talking a little bit about where could we possibly go next with things. These are really just kind of some spitball ideas that Adam and I put together. You know, in terms of tooling and things like that, I think it was really interesting in the meeting prior to this with the OKN, talking and seeing people get up and say like, hey, you know, we've done this, and I'll be honest, the kind of takeaway I gave from it, although several people who made those comments are here, but I think part of the takeaway was it's kind of like, okay, we've published this information, we've put it out there, it's been searched and indexed, maybe now we're in Google dataset search, check, done with that. What's the value to us for this? How can we make this more valuable to the facilities? And so I think there's some interesting things that we might be able to do there in terms of the validation process, the automatic processing of these documents, and being able to report back to the facilities, and the creation of these validation processes with the domain science input, so we can kind of begin to see the questions or the things that we want to do with these graphs, put them into a machine readable format, and then exercise the products that are coming from the facility against these kind of things. I've chatted a little bit with Matt Jones at Data One about some things that we could do with scaling on Gleaner, and seeing if it could address some of the needs that Data One has in that area. And also then, you know, we have these data graphs available to us. There may be some opportunities to leverage NLP, NER type things to look at some of the keywords that are in there and see if we can match them up against existing ontologies so they become things, not strings in that regard. So those are just a few of the kind of, you know, quick things that we came up with in terms of the tooling side. Adam, you want to talk about the vocabulary?
Sure.
Where we might go?
Yep. So one idea that's come out of the schema.org cluster was this idea or notion of profiles. This work came out of a similar effort in the life sciences, where they've sort of said, okay, here's how you publish a data set, but in life sciences, this is what a data set profile would look like. And so having a profile for geosciences or other domains is one idea. And one example of that might just be, okay, what do you have to do in schema.org to become a Data One member node? And so maybe Data One has some additional fields that need to be published to make that happen. But that's just one example of what a profile would do for us. Another idea was just sort of domain knowledge integration. And so certainly we've heard from folks like Magic Nick. He's got like a lot of great vocabularies describing that domain. And so how do we incorporate that into schema.org? So certainly there's some work that can happen there with paleomagnetism. Also the suite ontology would be another example. And then finally, just extensions for the sciences. So in all of the folks that we've worked with, we've heard of concepts or ideas that aren't quite in schema.org as the core, but are really important to the research projects. And one example of that is this idea of a research site, which is important to Iris, I think, in Neon as well, is like, how do we talk about a specific location and more than just calling it like a place. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it on the vocab side.
All right.
You probably have better ideas than I do, so let us know.
Well, we'll hear those in just a minute here, so we can go to questions. But I just wanted to just thank EarthCube. Thanks CDF. You're where this kind of work kind of spun out of. Thank you for ESIP as we've moved vocabulary work to there. Exceed for hosting all this work and our interactions with RDA, Google Research, Data One, ARDC, CSIRO, the whole group. So thank you very much. And if there's questions.
Yeah, hi, Doug and
we got
Adam.
two up,
Can you hear me?
here first, and then we'll get to the online one. Sorry.
Oh, okay, good.
The domain vocabularies I'm interested in. Is that part of your governance? You know, we had a year ago here, we had this discussion on defining the I&R in FAIR, and that we need some level of governance to ensure certain components of that. And, you know, every one of us has a vocabulary, you know, but which ones are you using? Which ones should we go to? You know, that to me is an unsolved issue. Do you have ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think we understand how we might incorporate it into the schema.org without, ruining anyone's Google harvesting or Data One harvesting. But that's about as far as we've sort of approached it. And I think we're kind of leaving it up to the folks that are interested in bringing their domain.
Because you brought up variables and connection methods and so on. These are things that are central to us, for example, at EarthCamp. And there are hundreds and thousands of so who is?
I don't know who's leading that. I mean, we've just sort of, at least on the vocabulary and the guidance documents, shown you how to do it in schema.org, but really haven't gone farther than that. So, yeah.
Ruth wants to talk about that. Might be irrelevant.
Thanks. I have a couple questions. The first is, there was sort of a loose commitment by the Council of Data Facilities to participate in this, and how are we doing statistically in terms of in council?
So, and I guess it kind of depends on how you look at it. I just did a new index literally this weekend. It was a situation where everyone that had originally published is still publishing. That's great. Some of the sitemap URLs changed a little bit. And in some cases I got a proper 303 redirect, in some cases I didn't. That's a technical thing, but I mean, everyone's still publishing in that regard. We're still getting good results from those publications. I think that there are a couple of areas, and thanks for bringing this up, Chuck, because I didn't pull them out. It would be good to, is there some way in which we can formally bring a question to the CDF that's relevant to this? So an example of this would be the sitemaps, right? Really no one's properly using last mod dates in their sitemaps. So therefore, the code basically has to re-index the whole site. But if we had a way to incorporate last mod into that, that'd be great. I feel like that's maybe something the facilities should think about, not the tool developer, right? And so, that would be an example that I think I had another one on there. I can't remember what it was. But there are, if CDF's interested in these questions, I would love to work them up and send them in and see if they could be discussion points on an agenda or things like that. And we could work them to a resolution and agree on them as a CDF so that I could incorporate them into the tooling.
That sounds like a great idea. So the related question would be, with all your tools now, I come in as a new repository, I don't know anything about it. But you guys are still around to help, and if so, how long with your tools would it take to look up?
So this is one of the things that we did in terms of Project 419 from the tooling side, was to actually try and make it so that all the tools now work in a configured environment, right? When I went back and looked at the code I created in 418, it was just kind of like, I mean, this is bad, right? You had to like go in and edit some things. So now it fully runs in a configuration environment. Is there work to do? You bet. Is my documentation good? No. There's a video you can watch, and I've had some people succeed. It's been great. Some people have taken the tool and downloaded it and run and built their own indexes. I'm thrilled, right? So to answer your question, if someone came in to me and said, how do you do it? I just add an entry in the configuration file and rerun it, and it builds an index. And I can add that index into the search interface. So fairly easy, not fully automated. But so, yeah.
And you're still willing to help?
I mean, to the extent, I mean, neither one of us has funding anymore, but I think, he's working on it from the vocabulary side of ESIP. I think that's valid. That's worked. I'm keeping the lights on, for that. I think it's valid. I have other interests in that. So yeah, we're still around, but we're not going to do major development.
That's a great point that Chuck brings up, even the sustainability of what you guys have provided thus far. And we don't have anybody from ECO or that ECHO or whatever. Yes, correct. Oh, great. Okay. So
oh yeah. Bruce got a fun one. Then we got an online one then too.
Right. All right, so we got to get the online person not to go away, but that's a good point to bring up, the sustainability.
Very true. And what I wanted to note was that at that meeting in Helsinki, there were a lot of data repositories there. And they actually were very interested in the kinds of questions that you were asking. In other words, how do you pick control vocabularies and things of that nature? And they basically came to the conclusion that there has to be best practices that go beyond what these guys have done from a technical standpoint that specify things like what are the identifiers you're going to use, what are the control vocabulary, and that community is willing to do that work. It would be great if this community was willing to participate with that community or separately or something. It's basically the polar data form. It's basically the IR SCADA. Oh, I forget the last one. Under the IR data committee, but it includes SCADA, the Southern data manager. It's global, and you've got polar data. But it doesn't work.
Can we take the online? Was there, if someone had a question online, would they like to throw it out?
Yeah, hi, Adam. This is Vishu. I had a quick question. Is there any organized effort across the Council of Data Facilities or EarthCube in general for adding geo extensions to schema.org?
Oh, yeah, great.
So the question was, is there any, Vishnu, was there any mechanism through CDF or EarthCube?
Yeah, I mean, where anybody can join this. Is there like a working group that we can join where we can provide some feedback to all the extensions that are being proposed?
Yep. So the question was, is there a working group and to propose these things? And I think the ESIP schema.org cluster would be that the place to do that. And so Vishnu, if you go to scienceonschema.org, you'll see a link to the cluster, and there's 2 telecons a month, the first Monday at 5 p.m. and the fourth Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. And then there's a Slack channel for sort of, asynchronous communication and a mailing list. So that would be the place.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Doug and Adam? Sounds like there were some great action items, and I think Lynn is still on and taking notes, so I think we can kind of grab some of that content. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Great. Thanks, you guys. So next up on the agenda was supposed to be CCHDO and MAGIC, and looking at updates on progress on an EarthCube supplement related to P418 and P419. But Steve is now in the room after a long, arduous travel, and so we are going to pass off the baton here in terms of convening this meeting, and I am on the hook for a later topic that I'd like to just kind of run by you guys now, and then I'm going to rejoin the ESIP board meeting that I am absent in as well. So really quickly, over the course of the last few assembly meetings, monthly assembly meetings, there was discussion about approaching the roles and responsibilities of the chairs and the rest of the exec. That was brought up. I brought this topic up with the EarthCube office in terms of when the charter was informed and if they have any guidance on how that charter could be modified to reflect some of these more explicit roles of both the co-chairs, the existing co-chairs, and the rest of the exec. Those are now, they provided some updated information on the EarthCube Leadership Council Charter and how that has included language. They recommended the CDF adopting some of that language. We also discussed with Eva adopting a conflict resolution piece to include in the charter. She recommended that, and I think the EarthCube Echo is working on something along those lines. So we will follow that and see what comes out of that. But there are suggested changes that you'll see at that link in the agenda. They are specific to just the roles and responsibilities within the EarthCube Charter, and they're in response to sort of tightening up some of the explicit roles of the co-chairs. Also guidance on in the event that a co-chair is unable to attend meetings or leaves the exec entirely. So that is at that link. That is going to be open for comment. In addition to adding new content, some of the existing founding charter content for roles and responsibilities was moved around and tightened up so that the content that describes each individual section, assembly member, exec member, co-chair, and office support staff is now united and all consolidated under each heading. So invite you to take a look at that, put in comments in that, and we can vote, it will be voted on in July. So there's plenty of time to discuss that and bring it up at subsequent monthly meetings if necessary. And this is just sort of the start of that conversation. And it is, again, only on that roles and responsibilities section of the founding charter. The second point under summer topics is that the full slate of CDF exec is going to be up. The term positions are coming to an end, so both co-chairs and 3 at-large exec positions will be up for nomination this summer. I know. I thought so too. Yeah. So at this point, it'll be starting to think about who wants to step into that role and take charge for a little while. I think that Lynn and the ECHO will be probably accepting or making an announcement about accepting nominations, self-nominations shortly. So stay tuned for that. So this is just sort of your heads up on that. And if there are any questions or comments about either of those topics, feel free. There you go. I love how you just say it and it happens. Okay, so without further ado, we'll queue up Steve and Nick on their updates, their own supplements for the P418 and 19 implementation.
Hi, everyone. This is Lynn. While we're making the transition, for folks in the room, if you have not already signed in your attendance, if you could kindly do so. It's at the top of the agenda.
Thanks, Lynn. I don't know if everybody can hear that. You're coming across only on the podium.
Yeah, so if you could repeat that.
Yeah, I will. I'm gonna plug this in and see, because this got unplugged. There we go. So now I think we've solved that. So Lynn's comment was, if you're in the room and you haven't visited the agenda to sign in and put your name down as an attendee, please do that.
So that's not the right one. Should be this one, isn't it, Steve?
Should be.
It says attack report. Ours will be short at least.
It's called slideshow carrier.
All right. Well, I can just talk about mine. So we got a supplement from the CDF group funds to work with the P418, 419 group. Oh, I'm sorry. To work with the P418, 419 group. And the main thing, we're a paleomagnetic sample-based database called MAGIC. And what we were really interested in is they already had good descriptions for latitude and longitude, geographic location, and also for bibliographical location or bibliographical information. But geologic time was really not being expressed. And so we were going to work on getting that set up for our database and work with Adam and Doug on doing that. So we've got modification of schema.org that now allows for geologic timescales. You can have start and end dates going back billions of years now, whereas before you could only go back to BC 9999, I believe. The other thing we have added on is putting in a lot of paleomagnetic specific data in headers, and just sort of working with them to try to see how that's going to work as a first run. I agree that more getting vocabularies correctly aligned with other groups would be a great idea, but I think some repositories are specific enough that they can have their own information and fields defined for a start anyway. And when other people start using it, maybe they use that as a template. So we hope to continue working on things like uncertainties was a big thing to add to schema.org, and just continuing to develop the schema.org system. Yes?
Yeah, question when you were describing that you have ways now to properly describe age. Oh, thank you. Your ways of describing age. So are you doing this at the level of an individual sample or core, or is it for an entire data set?
So right now it's for an entire data set. So that's another thing we'd like to do at some point is at a site, well, we call it a site level, but yeah, for an actual geologic unit to have an age for that too. So, but for right now, it's just at the very highest level where a range of all the samples is what we have.
Right, and I mean, actually, that's still, yeah. I mean, the work on, having schema.org and IGSN landing pages, right, would go really well with that. So maybe, this needs to be a slightly broader effort if there's more interest in having those descriptions at the level of individual samples.
Yes, we definitely would like that. Another development, that would be good.
Any other questions from anyone online? I saw the little icon for GoToMeeting sort of bouncing impatiently at the bottom. No? Anyone else in the room? Okay, thanks, Nick. So I'm gonna switch up and hopefully not have technical difficulties. Fresh off the plane here. All right. Apologies to people online who can't see the fact that I'm typing, which is glacially slow. And if someone online would let me know they can see the slides.
We can see your slides.
Thank you, people online. Okay, so this is actually kind of a summary. Nick and I both engaged in a supplement through the EarthCube office to do some interesting things based on the fact that we had this jumping off point with schema.org through project 41819. This is specific to the repository that I'm involved with, but it also has to do with sort of the underlying philosophy and the opportunity for CDF. So the idea that for what we wanted to do was to sort of bring in an idea of federated search across repositories. So listening in the car earlier, there was a lot of talk about how do we get more unified and how do we have this unified view of the repository that brings utility to the users. Karen Stocks and I, Karen was a PI on this on Seaview, and we actually were able to find the same sort of sets of observations between BecoDemo and CCHDL, but we had to do a lot of handcrafting. We didn't have the same metadata, and so we saw this opportunity with geocodes, and my eternal hat is off to Doug and Adam for doing this because they took that decision out of our hands, and so we now have this common platform of vocabulary to deal with. So just to get a couple of the same observations in two different repositories, we had to do a lot of hand wrangling of the metadata. I'm actually kind of glad that Ted's not here to throw rotten eggs at me about hand wrangling metadata. And what we accomplished was we were able then to bring in things and put temperature and salinity on top of chlorophyll that were from two different repositories. Lots of users in our focus group said this is exactly what they want. They don't want to be looking in different places for the same observations. They want to, of course, get to the point where they're doing science faster. And so when we approach this supplement, we have the intellectual merit and we also have the proposed work. And basically the intellectual merit was we're going to narrow it down to just the ocean data repositories. We should be speaking the same language, and it should be reduced time to solution to do this. And we wanted to address the lack of a federated search across oceanographic data repositories, which didn't mean that we'd have this real-time federated search, but as far as we know, this is the first recent attempt within sort of profile-based oceanography to unify these things so you could look at two different repositories at the same time, just with an area of interest box, and see what you get back, and then it would be left to you to reconcile the observations and to do the science. And what we wanted to do was to leverage our existing activities in doing this to align. So under the hood, we hadn't done a lot that went toward what people are calling fair. And we saw that as an opportunity to do it, and we had less decisions to make in that regard. So you can see the diagram on the right. If I can move that out of the way, I guess I can't, but it's right in the middle of the slide. But there's three repositories here. The bottom one is surface meteorology, the middle one is BecoDemo, and the top one is CCHDL, all looking at the same map and trying to bring out what looks like the synthesized result that I have on the other side is a bunch of observations within a given area of interest box. So right out of the gate, one of the participants couldn't due to lack of funding and personnel, so Samos was out, but that actually we thought would make our job a whole bunch easier. And we started to go in and hand tweak things to see how we would structure the data, our data in CCHDL, to be compatible with what Adam had already done at BecoDemo to make sure that we could do this. So we had a lot of lessons to learn. You know, we thought that all profile-based oceanography would be the same. It's not. Even when you have, you're putting in your landing page of schema.org, things look quite different. There's a little bit of metadata difference. The ships may be called something different. So when you're trying to match things up, and this is, you know, all in the hindsight seems very, very obvious. But in a naive sense, going in and looking at this, it's not at all. We had different styles. We started building indices by hand. And what it taught us is that we had a great jumping off point, and we never would have attempted this without what happened in Project 418 and 419, but we still have a lot of work to do. How we describe positions, whether or not we have a geometric box that surrounds a group of observations versus individual observations. So we were looking at the world in different ways, neither right or wrong, but we served different audiences. So the concessions was, some of the concessions we had banned in the real time, that we were going to have to do a cron job, offline build of scraping websites, but we still had that the JSON LD at the landing page in schema.org to use. Now notice nowhere in here have I mentioned Google at all. I'm using the common vocabulary just like we would with NetCDF or HTML to get a job done. If you try to reconcile websites based on just the fact they're both HTML, you still have a lot of work to do, and that's what we found out here. Some handcrafting was still necessary. And of course, we had some things that are out of scope, like performance issues. What happens with Leaflet, which was a low-hanging fruit for us in terms of mapping things on a web page. But what happens when you throw 70, 80, 180,000 points at Leaflet in a box in an HTML page? So those things were kind of out of scope. If we had more money, more time, and were more dedicated to it, we might try WebGL, which renders faster on web pages, things like that. But there are some opportunities for CDF, and I don't think that we should pass these up because of Project 41819. We have this globally accepted technology to rally around, and we can start to have these conversations about what's possible rather than thinking federated search is something off in the future. It's not. It seems to me that both NSF through EarthCube is very, very amenable to giving people bits of money to do things that are out of scope in their original charter for their project, noting that it's time to sort of reconcile things. So the big first step has already been taken. We can do things like do what Nick did with domain enhancements and adding to the vocabulary and doing some things like time. Time was something I wouldn't consider, but it's something that's at the center of what Nick does. It's getting easier to present a single view on these repositories. And so CDF is the perfect place to have these conversations, to consider technologies coming out of things like EarthCube, to say what is possible, can we get the money to do it, and it has the right personnel to get these things done. That said, we still have a long way to go. It's essential. It's not only essential to have patience, but to have a little resilience with failure. So, you know, you can try something, and if it doesn't work, you go back and you do it again and again. It's not this sort of linear path to progress. And again, I haven't mentioned anything about Googling. I think the first wave of people that went through Project 41819 that adopted these things were looking at the Google data search and how successful they were at having some third entity come back and index what they had and bring search results. Valuable in itself, but we have another opportunity to do things that are just within the Council of Data Facilities to present much more of a unified view. And hopefully at some point there will be, I hate the word portal, but a portal that does enable the users to be able to do this kind of work and get to science faster. So that's all I had. And Ruth is patiently raising her finger. Yes. Oh, and sorry, Ruth. I'm going to play both sides of this. And if you're online and you have a question after Ruth is done, just speak up.
Yeah, so I guess what I was trying to say earlier was, I think it is necessary for CDF to have these conversations, but I don't think it's sufficient. That there are other communities, polar data communities, the one I know about, that are doing these very same things and who have agreed that this is absolutely necessary work. So we just need to make sure that we do this in a coordinated fashion so that we don't end up having different groups do it differently. Because the polar data community quite literally wants to have a global federated search of all polar data everywhere. And I mean, including Russia, China, etc. And that's their goal. And I hate to say it, but there's oceans in the polar.
I'm actually involved. Yeah.
You're part of the polar group, right?
Yes, I am.
Right.
So there is an issue of, to answer Ruth's question, not to stand next to each other and text each other or have this conversation with Mike. There's an issue of turf and credit. People want to solve the problem first. And I think that's just kind of how we grew up. And we do have to get over that and start working together and saying, hey, these people solve this problem, let's adopt this. And I think we've got that with the scheme.org project 41819. We need Steve. Hang on. Steve Richard is talking next to the people, for the people online.
Hi, Steve. I was just wondering what's the granularity of the data you want to register in scheme.org's data set. So I know it's not clear, I think, the marine data sometimes what the data set is. So I was wondering how you dealt with that.
Quite by accident, actually. We thought everything would be a single point observation. It's not. I think that the way that Epidemiol looks at it is a collection of observations in some senses, that there are these area of interest boxes or these geometries are built into the schema.org itself. Whereas we were going point by point by point by point, and then trying to aggregate and say, what is this the same thing? And it's like, well, how do you do that? That's where some of the handcrafting came in, is we had to take some things that were in a box or a collection of observations and put them in a box to match the two and say, this is the same area. We're looking at similar observations in the same, in X, Y, Z, and T. Actually, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly follow up on what Ruth said. You know, in many ways, it becomes so complex right? I mean, even if the Arctic community does it, there's geochemistry there. But when we try to do something in geochemistry, we have to connect to what chemistry does, what crystallography does. So you know that structure, how we actually govern our our knowledge across disciplines, that has not been solved, and it's not. And I think experience shows that it's basically impossible. That you'd rather have to make translations or but that discussion, I don't know how we can create a constructive dialogue within the group.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, the thing is that we naivete was actually our friend, and that we just charged straight into this. But what I found was interesting is when you survey users, and Karen and I have these interest groups of people in CEU, demand doesn't diminish because people think something is not possible. And I think it's one of those things that you end up having these technologies like HTML or NetCDF all of a sudden. Wouldn't it be great with NetCDF if there was a way back in the day that we wrote data in binary, if we could transcend the binary, right, with compact data, and sure enough, there's this external data representation library by Sun. CDF is built on top of that, and all of a sudden people don't care about what the bigger little Indian is in floating point. So we see these technologies enter from the side, and all of a sudden the question, or the thing that we've always wanted to do becomes very possible, and then we have the next stage of hard conversations. Doug fills up.
So, Steve, just a quick question. When you were doing these resolutions between these various providers, were there any APIs involved in doing that, or what was the more detail on this kind of data and munging connecting?
So we were actually scraping the sites themselves. We weren't using the APIs from either site, even though we know our own API. Yeah, I don't know what that was about. But yeah, we were just doing sort of the brute force stuff because we were really focused on, and we were going from zero to hero at CCHDO with just implementing schema.org from the ground up. And I think this comes back to the problem that when we had the FGDC and then ISO 19111, help me out, guys. Thank you. I had a metadata person in the room. You never know which one to implement because you never have built it into your original grant to actually chase this stuff down and do a good implementation. And what I found was with FGDC, with the 800-page manual, is you may be the first person implementing this stuff. And so instead of having this resource where you actually have a guide to do things, you do the first few steps and then you're the innovator where everybody else comes in. And that's not what we want to be into. We want to be adopting things that are accepted, not being on the bleeding edge and answering other people's questions. Ruth.
And so on that front, I would say that most of the Polar Data Forum issues are things about best practices. And I agree with you that, to a geologist, thermal colors means one thing. To a biosphere guy, it means something else. One of them is a process, one of them is a landform. But all that really means is that you need to agree as to what you would like to have in terms of data that can come together. And then maybe you have to do two different things with that, one for one community, one for another. For example, you can have a thermocharic process and a thermocharic landform as two separate terms, even though the communities only use the first word of them. So, it's really a question of what do you want to have show up in your user interfaces when you're doing this federated service. So, obviously there should be some common set of things that everybody has, which I think are basically time space parameters. But then if you want to do something more sophisticated, then the set of communities needs to agree on how best to do that and codify that in best practices and create validator software to make sure that you did it right.
Anyone else? Okay, Greg is online and wanted to be the presenter. Greg, are you there? Hello? Ah. Can anyone online hear us?
I can hear you.
Just you, Steve, not the other person talking.
We can hear. Okay. If Greg wants to present, you got about 15 seconds to make your wishes known. I did. Going once. And I'm the presenter again. Okay. Okay. Any other comments, rotten fruit on this topic? Again, I think there's an unprecedented opportunity, and I don't think we should be so success oriented that we back away from trying just because things seem impossible, because it seems to me that it's sort of a square wave. All of a sudden things become possible, and you should go to where your users are. I mean, and that's kind of where we're focused as a collection of data repositories, is we're trying to serve our users both within our domains and collectively across the earth science domains. All right.
I do have one question if you have an opening.
Yeah, go ahead. This is
okay. Yeah, this is Rob from Iris. The thing that makes me think about is it seems like going with the approach of common vocabularies to kind of merge different data domains, maybe ones that are kind of closely related. It seems to be something that's more approachable for a lot of us than the extensive efforts that are being made to create these ontological maps, which have very rich vocabularies and a lot of technical work going into them. What would you recommend that the CDF be pursuing? Should we be going for kind of the short reach of common vocabularies and kind of seeing where the Venn diagrams of overlap are between data sets? Or should we be putting our focus towards contributing to the rich libraries of OWL descriptions and suite and so forth? Should we be trying to jump into that domain?
all right. Robert, we got some knitted brows in the room. You may want to be a little clearer on your question.
Okay. Sorry, it's just there's two different means of search that are being pursued right now, and I liked your presentation where you were basically trying to find ways to find terms that were common, and that you could basically kind of hand map things to be all kind of fit into the same slots. But the technology is there, and some efforts are being made to do these very complex descriptions about how different terms relate to each other, and they represent complex graphs. And I just didn't know if there was some thought put into what the CDF should attempt to do first. Should we just kind of stick with simple terms, and perhaps with this this portal effort you're talking about, should we be trying to get seismology and geodetic and polar and oceans to kind of fit all into the same terms, just in a very simple way, as opposed to complex, graphs, trying to figure out how disparate terms relate to each other?
I think in my limited experience, I've reached higher and been beaten back to the basics of how things get matched up, just because the technology may be there to do this other graphing and matching, but my expertise doesn't extend into that area, one, and two, it has been sort of a rabbit hole exercise where I get too involved in the technology to do things and not trying to solve my original problem of actually the federated search, and bringing this sort of seamless, simple experience to the user whereas the underlying differences are complicated. But that's just my opinion. Ruth Durer has a comment.
Yeah, so the comment I was going to make is that there are a wide variety of semantic resource types, ranging from, everybody agreeing on a controlled vocabulary, everybody agreeing on definitions for terms, all the way up to ontologies that have complicated inferences. And basically what that means is that depending on where you are in that spectrum in your community, you might you might have to concentrate on, can we even get the community to agree on what first year sea ice means, or some term like that, but it's really a question of what your goal is. Are your requirements to do simple things like federated search that only has, geospatial, temporal, and parameters? Or are you trying to do something more sophisticated than that? The more sophisticated you go, the more complicated the semantic resources need to be. And seriously, if you haven't started off at the simple ones, I would certainly start there.
Thank you. I like that.
Here's a controversial topic that we really won't space. So it's like Kirsten said about COPFIS earlier. If you guys want to meet later and take me into the table for my dumb ideas, I welcome that opportunity because I'm crazy like that. But Ken McHenry is going to give an update, CDF update from the ECO office. And if I can hold your comment, just because of
not a comment, but on the chairman update.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to do a quick intro because we're running out of time of kind of the tech side of the new ECO office. I'm Kenton McHenry. I'm the director of software at NCSA. And basically what that kind of does is it's a pool of software developers, what we refer to as research software engineers that work across several dozen different projects and try to basically find commonalities, build reusable platforms and resources, share expertise, train new research software engineers, kind of leverage each independent efforts and get more bang for your buck out of all of them together. And so by building up core frameworks and so forth. So from this activity, we built up a number of different things. I was going to just touch on a few of them. But the one I really wanted to touch on here is with regards to EarthCube. I think one of the main things that we bring to the table in this new office is that between NCSA and SDSC, we're involved in a great deal of these activities that are what's NSF's envisioned research ecosystem for data and software. So this is a screenshot of the DIBS PI meeting from 2017-2018. And the idea there is to basically build out an ecosystem of components that are reusable, interoperable, connect together to build out larger solutions for the scientific community. The idea is to reduce duplication of effort, wasted energy, siloing, turf war kind of stuff, as Steve was mentioning, and basically make an ecosystem where things can just be stitched together to build out what's needed. And so this had an animation, but it's not going. There we go. And so we're involved in a good number of these things. So NCSA are the blue ones, SDSC are the red ones, OSN is between both of us. And so the idea there is with regards to some of the things like Doug, you were talking about, and one of the questions was next steps with regards to Gleaner and geocodes and things like that. And we've been directed by NSF to really take that up. And so one of the things we really are going to look at too is in terms of some of the capabilities that have yet to be developed is leveraging a lot of these components. These are, significant investments by NSF OAC. We're talking millions of dollars of investments over numerous years, over dozens of projects and so forth. Seeing if we could bring some of those together to deal with some of the indexing and search and discovery capabilities that have been discussed. Just in a quick example of some of these things, this is one of the ones that I was PI of. The idea was to build a component that deals with data transformations. So basically dealing with file formats, just as a service in the web, you pass off a file or a data set to it, it'll basically convert it to some readable format, And then this other step, we'll do extractions. We'll try to extract metadata, run AI on it to pull out pieces of metadata for unstructured data sets, find rivers and flood basins and things like that. So building out novel components like that, building out components from common needs. So this is one of our data management pieces of software called Clouder. And it's basically been stitched together from 24 different projects over every scientific domain of common needs. So none of those projects built out the entire thing. They built up pieces of it. And the idea is they all benefit from that commonality. And the software sustained because it's reusable by other efforts, things like that. So it's one of those things you can do when you are coordinating your activities. We can sustain software longer term. This is one of those with regards to risk assessment for earthquakes. There was a big 10-year gap in this software, for example, and we were able to bridge it and basically resurrect it for this new NIST effort, which has big plans to work with FEMA and so forth to deal with tornadoes and hurricanes and all kinds of different things as well. So that's kind of what we're trying to bring to the table with regards to the EarthCube effort in this new office is leveraging. That's the key word here. And so a lot of the team that's involved in this, and I see a lot of common faces here as well, has to do with this program called National Data Service Consortium that came out a while back to kind of bring together these common components that deal with publication, discovery, and so forth, and bring together stakeholders, publishers, and so forth around these needs, identifying these components, identifying the commonalities, making sure people are aware of each other and building out this kind of ecosystem. From there, a number of activities came out of it, a number of tools have came out of it. One of the ones we actually put into this proposal, but we were directed to put it on hold because we were to focus more on the data, but we'll get back to it later, was this workbench tool, which basically tried to increase the exposure to a lot of these components. They're all over the place in different domains. There's duplicate efforts, but people don't know about them. They don't know where these things are. And so the idea was to make a catalog of these tools, but not just a catalog, an executable catalog. So you can basically go here and actually run the tools that are in this repository just by clicking on a button. It'll bring up a toy instance for you to play with it and try it out. And so we were going to try to leverage this for the EarthCube tools inventory. That was one of the activities we had proposed. We actually did a prototype at the EarthCube All Hands meeting a couple years ago for EarthCube. Chuck, I think we worked with you on one of these things to add it into here. This was an example that we were going to build off of. Putting it on hold for the moment, again, because we've been directed to focus on data, and specifically geocodes. Another effort that came out of this is DIBS Wholetail. This is an effort that basically, I think we can leverage some of the activities here with regards to not just publishing data, but software with the data. This touches on the aspect of Jupyter Notebooks, RStudio, and things like that. To be able, the ability to do stuff with the data, you need that kind of code that goes with it. And so this DIBS effort, which is about halfway through, is trying to address the sustainability aspects as well. And so we're working with them on that. But it basically has to do with publishing Jupyter Notebooks and software along with data sets and allowing new users to find that data and run code with that data. So they're working with Data One and others as well, Dataverse and so forth as some of those publication resources and adding that capability on top of it. One of the more recent efforts is this new activity called Open Storage Network, basically to prototype a storage fabric across the US. So this has been a missing component for a number of, I would say, long tail users. Where do I put my data? And so the idea is to house these low cost appliances, low maintenance appliances of about 1.5 petabytes all across the country at universities. So the pilot stage has 5, but the idea is to eventually go to hundreds. And so basically for a user, they go to this, it looks like one single thing. They request an allocation for some time period. And that key aspect is it's not for archival data, it's for useful data that people are actively getting at. So the metric is, are people downloading and doing stuff with it, with these tools and so forth. And so these are the things that we kind of bring to the table and we're looking at leveraging. The team is made up from all these folks from these various efforts. Christine Kirkpatrick, who was the director of NDS. I'll be serving as the technical lead for the new EarthCube office. I was the technical coordinator for NDS as well. Melissa Cragen, who was the lead of the Midwest Big Data Hub. She's now part of SDSC and working with us on the EarthCube team as well. But she has a lot of experience with regards to this community building, bringing together people developing technology and the scientific community who needs this technology. Putting together our team, we're basically leveraging team members from all these different efforts that we're involved with. So Craig Willis, he's involved in the EarthCube effort. Ilya Zaslavsky, as you know, is involved with Synergy and the Data Discovery Studio now. And Steve Richard, Mike Bobak is our new developer that we've hired as well. And Mike Lambert, Dave Valentine, Kevin Coakley, and Casper Kowalik, all basically pulling from these different projects, some portion at a time, leveraging their experiences towards building out what are even directed to focus on geocodes. And so the main thing here is, as Doug was talking about, geocodes, the indexing of data from the Council of Data Facilities and the participants of that, making it so that there is a production level instance that we, by 1 year from now, hopefully, can point people to as this is the EarthCube resource to go to find data and do stuff with the data. So not just finding data, but doing stuff with the data as well. And so we're looking into, right now we're at the stage of basically working with the previous office to transition. We've done the transition of resources, but to basically code review and documentation is where we're currently at right now, but focusing on the step of this production deployment, ideally a year from now, that maybe we could present at the next HEU conference. As part of this too, we'll be doing a deep dive into a number of these NSF OAC investments to see what else we can leverage, things that are practical and ready to go that we kept connections with in terms of team members and so forth, or so forth, and basically disseminating this resource as an EarthCube entity. So I was going to touch on the resource registry, but I'll leave that to Ilya as well. That would be another aspect of that. We're hoping to kind of leverage activities there as well in terms of the tool side and the data side. But I'll stop there. Key aspect though is leverage, leverage, leverage. So if there are no questions, I'll hand it over to Ilya.
I'm gonna hold on to the question and get Ilya up and then handle those questions at the end.
Okay.
If you don't mind. So Ilya. Put people on. Oh, don't worry about time. You're good.
All right.
You're good.
You don't have to worry about time.
Sofsky is up next for the people online.
How do I get to?
I will entertain
to the agenda. Do you know?
It was Chrome.
Oh, did we close it? Do you remember where the agenda was at so far? Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so EarthCube Resource Registry project was a supplement to the previous office, and it was supposed to be a year long. It actually happened to be run very quickly. We finished it all in 6 months because of government shutdown and some consequences of that. So it was essentially Ruth, who is here, Steve, who is here, and myself, and it was a very fast-paced very fast-paced effort. You can go to this website and actually see the final project report, a bunch of presentations and all the entry points into the system, such as the form that you can use to enter information about the resource, how you visualize and explore these resources, and entry point to Sparkle, Sparkle endpoint that you can use to query these resources. I will very quickly run through, if I can figure out again. Here, through a presentation that will give you just some very basic ideas about what we do. The system is, the system, first prototype of the system is operational and more or less fully automated. How to, do you know how to make it bigger? Ah, cool. Sorry, you can see that I'm from a different operating system. All right, so final report, there is a link, and there are a bunch of components, as I said, registration forms, a form, control vocabulary system where you can actually suggest changes. There's everything's using GitHub and so on. So why do we do that? Because we want to have answers to questions such as what is EarthCube, what tools are available, or even, as we heard from the Open Knowledge Network workshops, there are much more esoteric questions like predict what is the distribution of fisheries or how much fish you can harvest in a particular area, which would require that you find a model of fisheries and run this model and then produce a request. So this model has to be registered somewhere. And we figured out that there are a bunch of types of resources that we want to register. These resources are listed here. Since it was so fast, the project, we had to do everything in parallel, and that meant developing ontology and controlled vocabularies, populating the registry and developing the actual code. All of the things, well, they would work better if you do it sequentially, like when you have some controlled vocabularies and then you develop code against that. But that kind of forced us to do it in a very modular fashion. So each piece can be updated separately. It has common software infrastructure with P418, and thanks very much to Doug and Adam for helping us get us up to speed with that. Everything is supposed to be, well, and it actually is automated. I'm not going to show you demo. We did that for the TAG presentation and for LC presentation because it will take some time. But once you submit a form, then it automatically generates JSON-LD file, it sends notifications, it puts JSON-LD file on Google Drive, it uses Gleaner to actually populate, puts it in an object store, then populates a triple store and gives you access to allows you to query that. And it also adds this to SWAF interface where you can find these resources that you just registered. And everything is built on Google Scripts type infrastructure. So that's a general overview. You submit a form, a resource description through a form, then it creates a JSON-LD record, then gets put into object store and triple store, and you can search it via Sparkle. It also gets into a Google Drive, an email is generated to notify you that things happened. We dynamically read content of the control form from a set of controlled vocabularies, and these controlled vocabularies have some sort of product governance in them, so you can suggest changes. And then you also can view it on the interface. Another piece of it that didn't appear on the overall slide is that whenever you submit a resource, we made a request to EasyID that would generate a persistent identifier that will get assigned to this resource. And so then this resource will be referenced by that ARC number. All right, so you see that, yes, there's a lot of cross-syncing that goes on between components of the system. And that's where you mint an ARC and assign this to ID and then send notifications. And when you want to explore the content, once you submitted the record, everything on this side gets updated. Skipping that part, well, all right, skipping that part because it's quite late, but you're very free. You're very welcome to click on the submission form. Actually, all right. I have no idea what I'm doing. That's all right. Present. Right. So you can imagine that these are three of us. It was a lot of meditation that we had to go through by populating the registry manually and then trying to see if this information can be presented in a consistent controlled vocabularies form and in ontologies. And that was a fairly intense iterative process because we try to get information from the actual descriptions of resources and then reconcile them with what has been described in common vocabularies that we had to deal with. And Ruth had done a lot of work on that. These are set of controlled vocabularies that are now on the ECIP cluster. There are 15 controlled vocabularies that have been developed. They are available as ontologies on the ECIP list, but also available as controlled vocabularies in a spreadsheet that is linked to the project. If there are any questions about ontologies, Ruth is here. But yeah, that's your slide, Ruth. So you can populate the EarthCube resource registry by going to a submission form. But mostly what we've done and what Steve spent a lot of time on is entering information manually into a spreadsheet, and then we process that spreadsheet. So there are about 222 records now, right? And how you can, so I would still want to show something, but how? Okay. Right, so that's a set of resources which you can look at by, not sure what's going on and why it doesn't, okay, all right. So these are resources of different types. You can look at them by keywords. You can look at them by which resources are, let's say, production ready or in production. For each resource, you can see the description of that resource and look up descriptions and stewardship and what are semantic resource types. And there's actually a fairly extensive schema that you can follow here because for different types of resources, you may want to see if this resource complies to a particular specification or if this service or API implements a particular model, if this is a semantic resource, what is the parent of this resource, and so on. So all of that information is encoded in the ontologies and in the schema. So this thing gets, this representation gets automatically updated once you submit the resource. And still have no idea what I'm doing. All right. So these are resources that have been developed, just a summary. The ontology, it's a set of ontologies and controlled vocabularies. We have a wrapper over naming authority so that now you can send REST requests to mint identifiers and use that in your project. About 220 resources and version 1 of the prototype. So that was initially a presentation to TAC, but I would also ask CDF if you have specific ideas about how this should be developed further. What we felt, since that was a very fast-paced project, we want to harden the system, we want to do a lot of user testing, and actually ask all of you to try to submit a resource, your favorite resources that you think should be discovered. Expanding the content, perhaps beyond EarthCube. Need to do cross-validation because at this point it was fairly limited. We validate individual fields, but do not yet cross-validate across multiple fields. That's sort of a limitation of Google Forms. We can code around that, but that will take some time. User training, governance, best practices, all the standard stuff. So on that, I want to, yeah. Was it like 5 minutes? Yeah, it was meant to be. Any questions, and especially since all three of us are here?
And we held questions for both you and Ken until the end. So
yeah,
open the floor for another 5 minutes. Respect time and probably the Rollins comments. So at that. Questions?
Yeah.
Or are we?
Actually, one thing that I didn't mention, and that should take like 20 seconds, is one of the demos that we are thinking of presenting next time is, well, regardless of funding, of course, we all do work for free anyway, we have a large inventory of resources, of data resources. For each of these data resources, we can launch some software to work with this data. So ideally, we would do it in a smart way so that figuring out what the resource, what the data formats are, we will be able to figure out what resources to use. And that would be an immediate demonstration of how useful that resource registry would be. So this is something that facilities may be even interested in, if you want to have resources that will work with your data.
Questions from online or in the room? If you're online and you have a question, please speak up.
And yeah, so since I'm here, and this, by the way, ties into what Kenton presented, because his group has been working on the workbench that he showed on slides. So ideally, from a large geocodes registry of resources, we should be able to launch workbench tools. And that would be eventually when EarthCube works.
Okay. Well, on behalf of CDF, for me and for Danny, thank you for your flexibility on looking over it's late in the day, and I know that the schedule changed to accommodate other things that are happening today. Of course, with any meeting that happens on Monday, it's great because we have opportunities to bump up against each other in the hallways and ask questions. If there is something, you can see me, see Danny, see Chuck, and contact any one of the other executives for CDF online. And thanks for your time on this Monday, and I'll see you all tomorrow morning at the open plenary.
Thank you, Steve.